Right, our reading this morning is taken from Matthew's Gospel. It's just the first 5 verses of chapter 18. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And he called a little child to him and placed the child among them. And he said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes such child in my name welcomes me." This is the word of the Lord. Unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. You've noticed in the gospel that the disciples are always asking Jesus questions, and they ask him a question on this occasion. They ask him, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Who is the greatest? What is it about people want to know who's the greatest, the best, and all that kind of stuff? But the disciples were like that, like children in some ways, in that respect anyway. But the fact that they asked that question showed that they had no idea what the kingdom of heaven is really all about. In life, it's all about ambition. It's about getting on. It's about power and prestige and fame. It's about selling yourself. I mean, I was just talking to my daughter some years back now, and she was applying for the job, and she was told, you've got to sell yourself. You've got to big yourself up. You've got to make yourself look as if they would make the worst decision in the world not to employ you. You know, and that's what the world does, isn't it? It says you have to exalt yourself, if you like, in order to achieve your goals. And then you have to climb the corporate ladder. It's all about getting on in life. But to go in that direction, said Jesus, is actually to go in the opposite direction of the kingdom of heaven. So he warns them, unless they turn around, turn from the direction they're going, then they would not be able to enter the kingdom of heaven. So what are the citizens of the kingdom like? Well, this is what Jesus says. He takes a child, we think probably about 6 or 7 years old, maybe a little bit younger, and then he places the child in front of the disciples, and he says that unless they change, or the Old King version said, unless they convert, unless they change and become like this little child, then you will never become a part of the kingdom. For, he says, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And see the way that Jesus flips it round. It's not the greatest, the best, the most powerful, the most learned. It's the one who becomes like the little child. Flips everything the opposite way around to the way that the world works. But what are the qualities of a child then that Jesus thinks are so important? Well, first of all, it's a child's humility. Children are very humble. The willingness of a child is always to take the lowest position. I mean, there are exceptions, obviously, but generally speaking, a child does not wish to push himself or herself forward. Rather, they prefer to stay in the background. They get shy, aren't they? They're humble. They don't want to be first. They would rather just be part of the crowd. And it's only as children grow older that the world starts to, put its print on them, so to speak. And they have to then push on or they get left behind. It's a dog-eat-dog world, and very often you have to lose this early childlike humility in order to get on, which is a shame. I was reading the new Swansea City manager's comments about one of his players. I found it very interesting. He was talking about Joe Allen. And Joe Allen is a very accomplished player. But what he said about Joe Allen, he said that he finds in Joe the most humble man he has ever met. And the reason for that, he says, he doesn't push himself forward. He's always willing to listen to instructions and to learn new things. And he's about 33 now, which is old for a footballer. And he's always ready to carry out the manager's wishes, every wish, he said. He doesn't push himself forward. He's always willing to take orders. In effect, really, if he had a team full of Joe Allens, then he could climb to the top of the league pretty quickly. But as we know, like other professions, there are those who are arrogant. They know it all. You've come across them in school, no doubt. They know the answer to every question even before you finish asking it. Well, that's not going to get you anywhere. It's humility, the willingness to take a lowly position that Jesus is saying that we need to seek. And as well as humility, of course, is the child's dependence on his parents. A child is naturally dependent from the word go, of course. He never thinks that he can face life by himself. He's perfectly content to be utterly dependent on his parents and those who love and care for him. And it's only as people accept this dependence on God, even as we grow up, and our need for him, that we discover his grace. Grace is God's help that is given to those in need. If you don't think you have any need, why would you need God's grace? And yet, as we look at our life, how difficult it is, especially be a Christian, then we should know that from the get-go, we need God's grace and help for everything. Like the psalmist in Psalm 34. He says, "This poor man cried, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of his troubles." He realized he could not help himself, so he cries out to God and finds that God is always there, ready to meet our needs if we are dependent upon him. And there's a wonderful answer there to our prayers. So there's the humility of a child, the dependence of the child, and finally there is the child's trust. The child instinctively trusts his parents that his needs will always be met. Listen what William Barclay, the commentator, says. He says, "When we are children, we cannot buy our own food, or our own clothes, or maintain our own home. Yet we never doubt that we will be clothed and fed, and that there will be shelter and warmth and comfort waiting for us when we come home. When we are children, we set out on a journey with no means of paying the fare, or with no idea of how to get to the journey's end. And yet it never ever enters our heads to doubt that our parents will safely bring us there." You see, to be part of God's kingdom is to have that trust in God. For only he can help us to forgive and love others, and to forgive and love our enemies. It's only he that will ultimately lead us home. We will never find our way to the heaven on our own. We must take the hand of God and learn in humility and dependence to trust in him from the beginning all the way to the end. May God then grant us his grace to turn and become like children, so that we may be a part of his kingdom and ultimately find our homes with him in heaven. Amen.